Welcome, everyone. This morning's webinar is the VR process step of employment and successful closure. And today's presenters are myself, Wayne Daigle, Suzanne Molson, and our guest presenter is Celeste Hunt, the program director with the Lumbee Tribe Vocational Rehabilitation Program. So welcome, everyone. We're glad you're here. Thank you for joining. We're going to go ahead and look at the learning outcomes for today's webinar. Upon completion of today's webinar, participants will be able to, number one, verify employment has been maintained for a minimum of 90 consecutive days. And we're going to learn how to do that verification. Number two, to better understand the importance of making sure the employment outcome is consistent with the consumer's strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, capabilities, interest, and informed choice. And then number three, we're also going to learn how to complete a successful case closure using the documentation and the templates that we've created for that. So let's go on to the first slide. And we're going to talk about successful employment outcome when it's been achieved. So this means that the AVERS, I'm sorry. Was that you, Wayne?
Nope, that wasn't me. Sorry.
Okay. I just want to make sure somebody wasn't chiming in. Let me share this screen again. So when we talk about successful employment outcomes, we're meaning that the AVERS services have been provided under an IPE, a plan for employment, and that IPE has contributed to the achievement of the employment outcome in the following ways. The consumer has achieved the employment outcome described in the IPE. So that employment goal that they set has been achieved, and that is the employment outcome. That the employment outcome is consistent with their, as we said, strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, capabilities, interests, and informed choice, or what we call the grade 8. The employment is in the most integrated setting possible, so it's consistent with the consumer's informed choice, and that the consumer is compensated at or above the minimum wage and receives at least the customary wage and benefit level paid to other employees performing the similar work for the same employer. That the employment has been maintained for a minimum of 90 consecutive days, and the employer, consumer, and the counselor consider the employment situation and consumer performance satisfactory. So I'm going to open this up for some discussion, and let's talk about some of these different points. When we say we've reached employment, the case has gone to a specific status, an employment status. And so in a perfect world, we think, oh, well, they're employed, stay employed for 90 days, the case is closed. But sometimes it's not that way. Sometimes there are a lot of different things that we have to cover, and we will cover those in later slides. But for the most part, if the employment is successful and the employment has been maintained for a minimum of 90 consecutive days with no issues, no problems on the job site, everything seems to be working fine, then after 90 days, you have a successful closure.
So before we move forward, I've got a question for people. If anybody's willing to share, that'd be great. The question I have is, do we have to only count a wage, as in money, when we look at our 90-day successful employment? because it says here that consumers compensated at or above the minimum wage and receives at least the customary wage and benefit level. So is it only money that we can look at, or what else can we look at? If somebody from the participants wants to jump on here, that'd be great.
What bullet are you talking about, Wayne? I'm not really sure I understand your question.
The third from the bottom, the consumer is compensated at or above the minimum wage and receives at least the customary wage and benefit. Does this have to only be money, is the question.
Okay.
Are you possibly talking about like an internship or?
No, we're talking about bartering, right, Wayne? This is Paula.
Yes, it can be barter.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay. Okay.
you have to
That's
put a value to it. Generally, they put a value to it, though.
Right, and so there's a lot of answers coming in along that same lines, Paula. We got Noah with some consumers, small businesses or home businesses, they barter. Kim puts out bartering their maple syrup they made for wild rice. We can change that back and forth. And then Casey, subsistence type work, room and board for caring for a family member's children so they can work. So when we start looking at this, I brought this up because as a new counselor, I was faced with a similar situation where a consumer was getting paid or fed, not paid, fed lunches and breakfasts for the work he was doing. And I had to go get I had to do a survey in the community to find out what the average cost of a breakfast was and a lunch. And when you added those all up, that came up as a compensatory wage for that individual. And it was at the same level as minimum wage when we broke it down. And so there's different ways to look at that wage. It doesn't always have to be money. And in Alaska, if anybody from Alaska wants to, if I'm wrong, please correct me, but they do a lot of subsistence stuff, and that's how they barter. That's how they determine their success, is how much black meat they're able to trade for, like gasoline or other things.
Very good. Thank you, Wayne. I appreciate you bringing that up. So does anyone have any comments? I mean, when you get to this point of the case, what are you thinking?
Well, when I got to this point, I was always
Celebrate.
giddy. I mean, I was like, we're at day 90. That's awesome. I mean, that's, yeah, party time.
Yes. Close
Unfortunately,
that
a lot of
gate.
times I ended up at day 89, which wasn't always that great, but
Yeah.
The thing is that, you know, looking at celebrating with the consumer, their family, with the tribe, with the employer, because in many cases, the journey was was not an easy one. I think about some of the, many of the social barriers in different communities, and think about what goes on in the school systems, and so I think it's great to think about how we celebrate the achievement of the consumer that has, learned how to really function. What were their outcomes? How did it impact them professionally and personally, and their families? So that's also a piece that needs to be included in this, looking at successful closure.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Suzanne. That's a good point. Let's look at the next slide real quick. So when we're looking at the goal of employment, what are we really looking at? What are we trying to achieve at this point of the case? We're looking at providing assistance and accommodations for the consumer to achieve their employment goal. We're also providing counseling and guidance for the most part. We're addressing any impediments to employment. We're assisting the consumer in obtaining, maintaining, or retaining employment. We're verifying that employment outcome is consistent with the IPE employment goal. We're also verifying that the employment is in a competitive and integrated setting. We're also determining that the employment outcome is maintained for a period of 90 consecutive days. And we want to be certain that the consumer is satisfied with this employment outcome. So these are some of the goals that we're looking at when we get to the employment step of the VR process. And we want to make sure that these goals are achieved both for the consumer and for the provider of VR services, the program, and make sure that these goals have all been accomplished in a way that's successful and satisfying for the consumer.
And I always looked at, my role was advocacy and then also teaching that advocacy, so that the individuals that I was working with, for individuals that I was working with, that there is this, maybe a new sense of empowerment where we're not shy to be asking for what they need in an employment situation and doing it respectfully, because that's part of what we would be doing is we would be working respectively between the employer and with the consumer. And all of those, as we present ourselves, we become role models in terms of language and respect and empowerment. So I think that's another part of looking at the goal, so that it's an ongoing thing. This is looking toward maintaining employment.
That's right. You're absolutely right, Suzanne. And I'm going to bring up a couple of documents for folks to look at. And if anyone wants to discuss them, let's look at this document here. So when you get to the employment and the consumer has successfully applied for and become employed.
You're gonna have to zoom in, Jamie.
Okay. How about now? Is that better?
That's better, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, great, great. So, there may be some situations on the job site that we have to look at, and there may be some additional work to be done. Once the individual becomes employed, they are on the job site, and then some issues may come up. So the way we resolve a lot of that, or a lot of those issues or concerns or impediments, is by looking at job-related services. So prior to employment, a lot of times we'll provide job search and job readiness. And this is an activity that supports and assists the client in searching for an appropriate job. It may include, helping them prepare for the application process, a resume. It may be also identifying appropriate job opportunities, helping them develop interviewing skills, or maybe even making contacts on behalf of the consumer with the company. We also look at job placement assistance. So this is a referral to a specific job resulting in an interview. Sometimes the client will obtain employment, sometimes they may not, but that's why we can continue job placement assistance. Other on-the-job supports are considered services provided to a client who's been placed in employment to stabilize the placement and enhance job retention. It may also include job coaching, follow-up, a follow-along, and possible job retention services. Another area that we look at is long-term follow-along support services. So this is defined as a support service provided to an individual who's been placed in employment. And this also enhances job retention. So they get to the job site, they start working and then they may become overwhelmed. They may not be understanding the instructions, and this is where we put a lot of on-the-job supports in place. Supported employment, this is usually for the most significantly disabled consumers who are seeking competitive and integrated employment. And this also needs long-term job supports to obtain and maintain employment. And then we can look at job retention. This is a service that is used if a client is seeking assistance with maintaining or advancing in current competitive and integrated employment settings. And when I look at this as a different kind of a case in which the consumer is already employed, but they come to you asking you to help them retain their employment due to their disability. And then work adjustment training. This usually takes place way before we get to employment, but sometimes when we get to the employment step, we may have to look at work adjustment. So, this helps the client or the consumer receive as part of the work adjustment training, through a CRP or a community rehabilitation program. And job coaching services are for the consumer that requires on-the-job supports to be successful in their employment. So these are just some different, I just thought we would bring these up and discuss them, because sometimes when we get to employment, things kind of go haywire, and then we realize there may be some needed or additional services. Has anyone had any experience with that? Well, we got a quiet crowd this morning.
Repeat your question, Jamie. Experience with what?
When you get to the employment step of the VR process and your consumer applies for a job, gets the job, gets on the job, and then they kind of realize they need a lot more help.
Absolutely. And that's why I believe it's, one of the requirements is for them to be stable in a job, not just the 90 days, but for them to be stable within their job.
Absolutely.
I put a couple of questions in the chat box, and maybe to get some dialogue going with our quiet group. Do any of you have a process that is different than what is on our slides that have been successful for you? And the other thing is, what are the barriers in your community to closure? What are some of the things that you're having? I hear often, I have rotating consumers. They come in and then they leave the program unsuccessfully, and then they come back. Do any of you want to, how does the process, how do you look at this process as maybe ongoing? What are some of the things that you have to tweak in between? Because, when we really look at it, and this is something that August Martin would share with us, is that, we're not doing VR from linear. It can happen, we have this process, but sometimes we have to integrate different processes to move forward. So any ideas about, fear of losing services? Jeremy says, yes. For the consumer, or is it the consumer's fear of losing their services so they don't want to be employed? That would be maybe their SSI or SSDI or insurance. Is that what you mean, Jeremy? Yeah. Want to talk? Rachel has something in there. Some are scared to be closed. They worry about needing services after closure. So we'll perhaps quit right before the 90 days. Yeah. So how can we address that? There is a way. I remember when Arizona State provided a little bit of coaching in terms of going to the website and helping people, I think mostly about their insurance and their health insurance, which is really something huge, and teaching them how to go through that program on the state so they can find out how much they can earn without losing their services. Wayne, I see her commenting, and Casey has something in there. Karen says relapse, which I believe is also fear related, yes. And Casey, barriers to successful closure, transportation barriers, fear of success, poor health management, and leaving work adjustment training for employment. Okay, so you brought these things out. How are you addressing them? And you can open your mics. I think we're allowed to talk. Anyway, food for thought. Maybe, hey, Celeste.
I like what Paula and Wayne and Celeste are indicating here. Wayne said he wanted to go back to Paula's statement that the criteria for successful closure includes the consumer stability. And so just like Celeste said here, you know, we have to work to build their self-esteem throughout the employment process. So sometimes we think when we get to employment that, you know, it's all smooth sailing from this point on, but a lot of times this is where the real work starts.
And there's a lot of support that goes into the 90 days minimum of employment, right? So you get somebody that's employed, we're following them for 90 days. During that period of time, that's when we start talking about what are the next steps? How do we, you know, how do we transition from that service mentality to now advocacy mentality? And it also is within our consumers, we have to look at how do we help adjust that receiving mentality. So in a lot of our reservations, we've seen that people have grown up under an entitlement type service where it's not, thank you, Rachel, you just put in there empowerment versus entitlement. Entitlement type mentality where the services and the programs are all just given to you based on economic needs sometimes, or just, you know, handed out, not on an eligibility criteria like the VR program. So shifting that entitlement thinking into an empowerment thinking is also part of our process. And moving that forward, I just want to hit on the minimum of 90 days. So in the VR world, we get stuck in this mindset of this rigid mindset of 90 days, we close the case no matter what. And in some cases that's inappropriate. We have to make sure that the consumer is stable. So the language in the CFR states that it's a minimum of 90 days of consistent employment. So we have to be able to have the flexibility in our programs to extend that if we need to. You know, if the individual is employed, I would rather take an extra few days to make sure they're going to maintain that employment than have to reopen a case in 2 weeks. It doesn't make sense to do it that way. We want to support that individual, and for it to be an appropriate, successful closure outcome, we have to show the stability in that individual's employment.
And this is Paula, and I think that you look at our models for providing voc rehab services, ours is circular. So when we explain the process, yes, there will be an end to closure. However, we're there to support the consumer with post-employment services. We're there to, again, support the consumer to have stable employment. And it starts out with our circular model of providing voc rehab services. I see Meredith on the call as well from Hopi. They also have their planting process, and it's when the voc rehab process is explained or paralleled with that type of approach, consumers feel that they are supported throughout the process rather than a linear, you apply here and it ends here. So I just wanted to point that out, and I don't know if Meredith wants to speak. She's also on the line.
Meredith, it looks like you're on the phone. If you need to unmute, it's *6 on your phone, and you can unmute yourself.
Anita posted in the chat box, while Meredith can decide if she wants to talk or not. People who have been receiving SNAP or other supports through social services programs usually have a difficult time understanding the importance of work. Some people will call us and choose not to apply because they worry about losing any benefits they were receiving. And I think that's also what Jeremy was speaking to earlier. Not only is it these social services benefits, Social Security, SSI, SSDI benefits, but it's also our food stamps and other benefits like that. The dependency that's been created through the entitled thinking is really damaging to our people. In Montana, we had land buyback, and we lost probably 40% of our applicants. They just quit following through because they got paid for land buyback, and they decided that bit of money was enough to keep them from becoming employed. They were going to live off that money. Well, of course, in 3 months, we saw a huge surge in our numbers again because everybody came back in and reapplied because they had blown through that money. And it's always interesting when you try and bring people into the communities to show like the employment benefits counselors and that type of stuff. When you bring them in, we had a poor turnout in our communities. People didn't want to come and learn about that, but that was so important to have those benefit planners come in to show that you could still work, you could still keep your benefits and still work part-time or full-time even.
I'd like to ask Celeste if you have a comment on this particular topic. Do you guys face any of those issues with your program?
Meredith is unmuted. Sorry, Celeste.
That's okay.
I'm kidding.
We do see issues all the time. I noticed that in the last several years, people come back. If you rush through and close them after 90 days and you feel that they're not ready, they end up coming back immediately. So there's times when I'll wait 120 days, or I just may even move it to 5 months just to make sure that that person is comfortable. Their self-esteem, they've got self-esteem builders while they're working. Once they start their 90-day process, I like to check in every week to see how they're doing. Stop by the office, let us know how things are going. That builds their self-esteem when they come in and say, oh my goodness, we're so proud of you. You're staying focused. You're getting along well with your coworkers. You're getting along well with your supervisor. If you have any problems, always let your supervisor know what's going on. Just give them some self-esteem builders so that they feel comfortable talking with their coworkers, or if they feel comfortable asking those supervisors questions, etc. That's a lot of the issues that arise, is not feeling comfortable asking questions, talking to individuals. And I like to extend it due to mostly those reasons.
Thank you, Celeste. I appreciate that input. And I think sometimes that we forget, we've been through such a long journey with the consumer at this point that once we get to employment, we feel like, oh, it's almost over. We're getting ready to close this out successful and be done with it. And we really do need to consider, those issues that employees may be facing on a new job. I know when I start a new job, I feel like, hey, I'm a little nervous. I don't know people for the consumer.
Okay, Meredith, have you got your technical issues handled?
She wrote it in the she wrote.
Hold on a second, Stan, where she was trying to come through.
Okay.
Hello?
There we go. Go ahead, Meredith.
Can you hear me? Okay, so what was the question? I just got flustered here.
Paul was asking to explain about how you connect with your growing cycle with your service provision.
Oh, when it comes to closures, Well, for me, I've only been here 2 years, so everything has been a learning process for me, and I learn from my consumers. And one of the things I've gone through was work on my own. I make forms. I'm very good at forms just to help me stay organized, and I follow through with the consumer, what the consumer's needs are, whether it's soft skills, going into employment, while in employment. And one of the things I've noticed too with working with those that are in small business or self-employment, as you mentioned earlier, to determine the closure status of minimum wage, I have to monitor them for so many months, even after 90 days, just to average out their monthly income, along with their knowing that they have taken food stamps or other means to help support themselves. So that's me working with my consumers. Does
Thank
that
you.
help in some way?
Thank you. I think Paula got busy again on with something, so I think that handled or answered her question. Oh, here she's back. All right, the masked Avenger. Go ahead, Paula. You answer that question.
Again, Meredith, I just wanted to, again, the planting cycle for Hopi, we were talking about how it supports the consumers when it's parallel with the VR process, that it shows the progression of progress in a plan, and that when you get at closure, you're reaping the benefits of their hard work. So that's what we were talking about in terms of making sure they're stable, making sure that they have those supports prior to closing them out. So I just wanted to bring that forward as I've talked to some of your coworkers in the past about how your cycle works, the planting cycle works, and paralleling that with the VR process.
Thank you, Paula.
Oh yeah,
And
definitely. Thank you, Paula. Sorry. Thank you, Paula, for bringing that point up. But yes, we do follow the planting cycle. And at each appointment with me, you know, we're going through the process and how it relates to the plant and the services, like the kernels that are growing on the corn. They're building the corn kernels towards the end of the planting cycle. So that's all the services that we're providing for them. So hopefully at the end of closure, you know, like how I'm providing all the services, I'm doing my checklist to make sure everything's going according to their individualized plan. And at the end of the 90-day, I'm completing a checklist that I've made, and you know, to make sure that we're reaping the harvest.
thank you so much, Meredith and Paula, both, for bringing the cultural aspect back into the picture for us with VR. And that's so important. And I love to hear how that is included in the entire process, just as Meredith was saying, the Hopi planting cycle. And I have seen your materials, Meredith, and I love your way of portraying the planting cycle throughout the VR process entirely. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, let's get back to the slideshow. I think, Suzanne, I probably went over one of your slides. Can anyone see this?
I thought, so we're up to slide, you can go ahead or or Wayne, I didn't hear Wayne talking.
I think we're at slide 8, and that's you, Suzanne.
Okay. We're looking at employment successful closures. So we have a chart below of employment activities, resources, and forms. So we're looking at successful closure case notes, unsuccessful closure case notes, on-the-job supports, self-employment, and communication checklists. So these are all of the, if you have a checklist, I find that when I don't have something that I can check off, two things happen. I forget what I'm supposed to be doing, and then I don't have that sense of self-accomplishment. So that's why the recommendation is to have a checklist. And I think that, overall, AVERTAC has been trying very hard to be providing different checklists in different ways. I remember the one Wayne put together for, the eligibility. And so these are all really good ideas to do. And you might already have your own, but you might want to think about, okay, how can I use a document put together by AVERTAC? Specifically, Amy, did you want to do?
I'm going to pull up some of these forms and we can look at some of them real quick. Hold on just a second.
Okay.
Sorry, my computer is jumping all over the place for some reason today.
Well, one of the things in the next slide, it does talk about the employment checklist, which is what was the employment, but did you have an employment goal? Was employment achieved in 90 consecutive days? What about successful closure? Were all the IPE services completed, right? Closure to justification, case notes and case files. This is something that really, again, I'm going to use August Martin as my mentor in this area in terms of he really advocates significantly for having, you need to bring that up, there you go. He really advocates to have case notes for everything. So if you have a form, I'm going to use the eligibility form that Wayne put together so beautifully. If you have that form and you're creating and you have all the answers and everything, it's demonstrating and, the barriers to employment and so forth, August, a recommendation and really puts forward that there should be a case note as well. So the form isn't good enough to stand alone. Jamie, do you want to go over your checklist here?
Sure. This is a form that was actually created by Wayne. And Wayne is working on a project. Well, Wayne's working on probably about 15 projects right now, but this is just one in which he's creating an example of a case file. And in that case file example are forms that we use for every step of the VR process. And this particular form here is one that I pulled in for the employment step, because this is what we call a successful closure checklist. It's got 26 up there, which you could probably take that off if you wanted to, because I know we don't go by case file status codes.
Yeah, that just dated me a little bit.
And
You're muted, Jamie. Still muted. There you go.
all right. But you could take this form. This is going to be in some of the toolkits that we're going to update on our website under the VR process. Some of the templates and forms that we're providing to programs that may need that. I don't know why my computer keeps saying I'm muted. But anyway, this is, like Suzanne said, just a nice checklist that you can go down, look at, the different areas, make sure you've checked off these items. These things are completed. I think these little gray boxes you can fill in. It's a fillable form. And these are just things that we really need to consider when we're looking at closing out a case. Wayne, you want to add to this?
This was created when I was with the Northern Cheyenne program, just as a tool, because we had some difficulty completing the closure process. We had consumers that were really good at stringing us emotionally along. They would engage us emotionally And so my staff didn't want to close the case all the time. So this was really developed to help them move from that moment of stability to closure. And that's, all these things are items that need to be addressed and checked off in that process. So the most important thing is remembering the data gathering, and then explaining post-employment services, how it's not a catch-all, and it's still, there's some eligibility criteria with the follow-up or post-employment services. So that's all I have on the form.
I was going to ask Celeste, do you guys use a checklist similar to this?
Jamie, what we do is when, we use data, we do use data ops, but we document, we put in, the hourly wage, et cetera, what they're earning, and it'll calculate all that, so that, and it's so important to us to use data ops, so that when we are doing our yearly reports, it will give us an average of what our consumers are earning, once we tally up, all the, say, for example, we had 25 26s for the year, and then that gives us an example of what the average wage is throughout the year. What I normally do too is the last progress review, we state, normally the first day of work, we state that the consumer has started working, they're working at this company, they're earning this amount of pay per hour. And we state what the problems were when they first started. And then as we go by, I try to state every 30 days before the 90-day closure, document how things went that month, if they're getting along well with their coworkers and supervisors, or if they're having issues with transportation, we'll document that. And then by the 90th day, we will do a closure progress review that states that they continue to work at this position, talk about work environment, talk about their wages, if they are still earning the same amount, or after 90 days, if they're going to receive a $2 or $3 raise, etc. I document that, and then all that's in that last progress review before we close it.
Thank you so much. And that's wonderful that you're able to capture that data, because like you said, when you get to the reporting part of the year, when you get to the, your quarterly or your yearly, your annual reporting, it's important to have this information. And I think when we created this form, Wayne, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we said we're going to try to create something for some of the programs that don't have a computerized system to keep track of their data, or they don't, have software or case management technology. So, but I also, even when I'm using software for tracking and keeping up, I still like to keep a hard copy in the case file. And I'm sure you guys do the same.
Minnie asked a question about the documents and being able to get one. So the reminder is that when we send out the survey, these documents will be attached. Is that correct, Jamie?
Yes. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let's look at some of these other forms real quick while we are on that section. So Wayne also created a very nice case note. It's a fillable document. And let's see if I can zoom it in a little bit further. And it's really just a very simple one-page case note form. You can type all your information into these gray boxes. Keep a case note. I think that a successful closure case note, it's should be mandatory for every program that you have a case note for successful closure, as well as one if you have unsuccessful closure. So this is just a real easy fillable form that if anyone needs a case note document to use for keeping case notes, you can use that. And thanks, Wayne, for creating that for us.
Yep.
Also, a lot of the data programs, data systems will have a case note. I recently saw a case note that basically there were just reminders on the top of the case note, like things that they wanted to remember to enter in. And I think language as well, using the language of impediment and barriers or obstacles and things of that nature. So you might want to draft your a bit of a checklist for yourself in terms of what are the things that you want to remember in a case note for application. And a lot of you also create template. You know, you have template letters, but you also have like a template case note for an application, so you're not forgetting to fill in all of the different aspects of an application or so forth.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. And also, this is a document that we've been working on, and I want to ask you all to please take a look at some of these documents and materials, because we are developing this as we present the VR process through this webinar series. And we would really like your feedback in the survey at the end of the webinar. If you review and look at these documents and you say, well, you know, that's different for our program, or we do things differently, or that's not exactly how it works for us, we would love to hear your feedback. But this was the form that was created by Dr. Gashioma, and it's different program case closure types. He talks about how case closure occurs at different times throughout the VR process. So, you know, you can close the case at many different steps, but what we really want to do is close that case at successful employment. But sometimes we don't. So this is just a document. It's just a informational form or material for you to use if you get to certain places and you want to close out a case. These are different areas and different steps of closure, and it gives some descriptions of how you go about closing at particular points in the case. So I just wanted to share that real quickly also. And let's go on with the PowerPoint presentation. Wayne, I think this is where you're going to pick up.
Okay.
Can you see it?
Nope.
Okay, hold on just a second. Let me get back there.
There we go.
All right, it's, for some reason, it's wanting to start back at the beginning every time we open it back up. But here we go, the employment checklist. Okay,
so like what was just presented here in those forms, this is a kind of a basic outline of what a checklist can be developed for your program. And again, we encourage you to individualize for your program, make sure that your items are being captured that you want captured, as long as well as what RSA is requiring us to capture. So we got the employment goal achieved, 90 consecutive days of employment. Again, that's a minimum of 90 days. Some kind of closure document that shows whether it's successful or not successful. And we want to make sure that our IPEs are completed and that we have successfully met all of the items identified in that IPE. Some closure justification case notes in the file, and any supporting documentations of employment. So what does that mean? Supporting documentation would be, you know, wage, employer name, address, hours worked, stuff like that. Closure letter to consumer. And again, we have to look at anytime we close a case, whether it's successful or unsuccessful, that we meet the criteria for closure, and that's a minimum of of at least 2 kinds of attempts of contact to close that file. So we want, you know, a note in there saying I spoke to the individual, and then this closure letter, or a note saying I called the individual and a closure letter, just so that we have 2 forms of attempts.
That's right. And I can't say enough. I think that all the program directors that are on here today would agree that documentation is so important throughout the VR process. So when we get to every step, we need to make sure that we're documenting. And as Wayne says, we're writing the story and we're keeping it in the file so that if anyone was to pick that file up and open it up to read and see what's going on with that particular case, they're going to know by your case notes exactly where you are and what's going on.
So, Jamie, there's a great question or comment in the chat box from Rachel. I'm interested in how other programs handle closing cases if the person is employed and you know they are or were, but they will not respond to attempts to contact them, or if they wouldn't sign a release and at the time of closure can't share their wages because they say the program doesn't need to know that info. The states can access this through their tax system. TVRs can't. States can close a successful based on seeing they have worked for an extended period of time. So please, can somebody jump in here and respond to Rachel?
Yes. Any of the program directors want to respond to this? Because I know for a fact this is a problem.
Rachel, this is Celeste. When you talk with them during the VR process, do you stress to them that once you close their case, you do need a copy of their pay stub, etc., to close their case? So, you know, that is an important piece of, we're here to help you, and we need that towards closing the case so that we can actually, I tell them we actually get credit for assisting them, you know, out of Washington, out of the Department of Education. So I try to stress to my counselors to please let them know that, you know, we're helping them in this process, and one of their goals is to make sure that we get a copy of that check stub in order for us to close that case.
Yes, thank you, Celeste.
Does other directors stress that?
Well, years ago, a lot of and I know it varies. Everybody, you know, we try to get everything that we need to get so that we can stay connected, but we did create a closure document where we did have somebody sign, you know, in terms of allowing us to call the employer and get the numbers that we needed. So that is one of the most difficult ones, being able to, we also did a tracking when they were doing tracking. So we would be able to contact the employer 3 months, 6 months, and 1 year. We're not doing that anymore, but so the thing is that, you know, we have to try and make the documents that we're working with our consumers as transparent and an understanding that we need those numbers, and it's not you know, they share everything else, so this isn't a violation of their confidentiality or any of those sort of things. The thing is that a lot of times an individual may not finish. I mean, they might complete their 90 days, but then they might not, you know, maybe 3 days after their 90 day, they might quit or something may happen. So there's lots of things, variables. Sorry.
So one thing that I did when I was a director is that we, at the point of employment, we would have a job description from that individual who was applying for that position, and that would usually identify the at least base wage, okay? And so we would keep that information, and if we had somebody bail on us like that and refuse to respond, then what we would do is we'd call the employer, and you can do a survey that's not breaching confidentiality. So you can call and say, hey, do you have this position? Is it still filled? Never say the consumer's name or anything like that, because you're not breaching confidentiality. And if they say, yeah, that we don't need to hire anybody, then potentially that individual's there. And then also I've went to the job site and observed that individual and put that in a case note. I observed the individual at work. They're refusing to comply or contact us, that type of thing. And it depends on your area. So in my area, it was a relatively small area. We didn't do a lot of off reservation placements. So we were able to do that. We were able to track them that close. And then you can also contact the state. And if they're a joined case, in those situations, they can pull that information for you and share it with you, because you already have that working relationship in place. Other than that, my only advice is what I'd give my consumer or my counselors is, if we spend money on them, we hound them until we know that they're either moving off the reservation away from us, or they give us the information. So it was kind of we would end up going knocking on the door, everything we could, because if I spent money on it, I wanted to get that credit. So Rachel, unfortunately, and as many of you have noticed or talked about in the chat, it's an unfortunate situation that we all have faced and continue to face. But if you can get the job description up front, verify that position's still full. You don't necessarily need to have that from the consumer. You can put that in your case note. Individual appears to still be working, contacted employer, said the position was still full, and here's the base rate that they got hired at.
I like what Anita has said in the chat box. She said that her program requires the consumer to submit verification of date of hire, the position title, the rate of pay, their work schedule, and it all has to be on the employer's letterhead. And she tells them up front she needs that information before she can offer any monetary support for work-related needs, work boots, work clothes, etc. And thank you so much for providing that information, Anita. I've been in that situation as a counselor when I knew the consumer was employed, but she just would not give up the information. And at that time, we were paying for her cell phone services up until she received her first paycheck. And then she never would tell us how much she earned her first paycheck so that we could discontinue that service. And like Wayne, I drove over to the job site, saw that she was there, recorded that, kept a case note, and then we discontinued the cell phone service. But there's a lot of ways that we have to be creative in making sure the consumer knows this is their responsibility to provide that information to us.
Maybe if you feel that there's a situation that's going to happen or getting ready to occur, Rachel, and maybe that person needs tools or clothing, maybe get them enough of clothing for a few days and enough of tools to get by, and know that the remainder is in the office waiting on them. And when they bring in their first check stub, they can pick up the rest. Sometimes you have to do it that way.
All right. Good ideas, everybody. Thanks for everybody's participation on that one. Jamie, you're muted again.
Sorry, I don't know what in the world's going on with this computer. I'd like to open this up right now because right now, COVID-19, we are in just a very unique situation right now with our programs. And I'm just curious if anyone wants to just talk about how the pandemic has affected employment for your consumers. Does anyone want to share some COVID-19 horror stories? Because I feel like that some programs are really just keeping up and continuing on, and then other programs are facing really hard issues and in fact are not able to reach employment due to COVID. Does anyone want to talk about that? How about just putting something in the chat box then?
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, this is Dion Naha from Hopi VR. And the staff here is just here for the few days out of the week. We're not always in the building, we're working from home. But I know that the two counselors here did express the concern that, you know, it's kind of difficult for the consumers at this point because of transportation. The public, the Hopi transit system that goes into Flagstaff and Winslow, that's all completely shut down. So a lot of their, you know, the services they were providing for their consumers involve transportation. So I know that's kind of something that we're facing out here in Hopi. And I think a lot of other places that are, you know, not very close to a, you know, a city, that's something that they're facing right now. So we're trying to adjust with it.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Are you talking about Sunam, the Hopi transportation that comes
Yeah,
in?
the Hopi Sunam Transit. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it still
Yeah.
running?
They're not running at all.
Oh, wow. And I know a lot of people depend on that
Yes.
to and from Flagstaff.
Yes, so they're not running at all, and you know, I think that was part of what their plans were in their some of their IPEs, and you know, providing that service, and that was kind of one of the services that we look to rely on.
Hello? Hi,
Hello.
this is Meredith. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sure can.
Okay. Thanks for that, Dion. She did share one of our COVID situations. I do have one consumer whom I had put into beauty school, and she just completed about the beginning of August. And one of the things she's facing is the state boards are still closed. She's not able to take her exams due to the COVID situation. And for her to be seeking employment, she's been out there trying to make contact, but due to the fact that she doesn't have her license to practice her field, she's not able to find work. And right now she is in the city, approximately 500 miles away from us, where she completed her schooling. So that's one of the situations I'm trying to help with right now.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that, Meredith. It never would have occurred to me that the state boards would just completely close down and not give students or applicants the possibility of completing their certification or their licensure after they've completed their training. So
yeah,
you know,
well, right now they're offering her a temporary license. So that's one thing she's waiting for now that the school has helped her with. So she's waiting for that in the mail, but until then, she won't be able to find work until she receives that.
I am sorry to hear that. Is anyone else facing closure issues that are affecting employment for your consumers? Oh, I see Rachel says they have someone working towards their massage therapy license, and that testing was closed down also. Wow, it never occurred to me that licensure or certification testing sites would be closed down. I thought you could do most of that remotely. Anyone else facing any employment issues due to COVID? Okay, then. Oh, wait a minute. Here we go.
Jeremy just stated in the chat box, we had lots of layoffs and had to switch gears to help people with unemployment services.
Jeremy, can you talk to us and tell us how that looks, how you're helping them?
Yeah. So we just basically had to do kind of a crash course on signing up for unemployment and just kind of all of the new ins and outs of what that looks like. And it's been quite a process. A lot of people got denied multiple times. So it was just, it's a very lengthy process, and people would be good for a couple weeks and then they would all of a sudden be denied again. And we'd have to just kind of go through that process with them. And we've been fortunate enough to get some contacts with the local WorkSource office here to get some help from those guys and answer some of the questions about stuff that we just don't understand or don't know.
So Jeremy, are you also following these guys along while they're on unemployment to help them maintain their employment?
We're still doing like whether it's a weekly check-in or a bi-weekly check-in, because typically a lot of these guys don't want to be on unemployment, and a lot of people still want to look for other work while they're laid off.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Latoya states that she had a consumer who had 3 job offers prior to COVID, and all those have been rescinded since it hit. Rachel states a lack of positions where they wouldn't be exposed, especially for those with compromised immune systems. Kim, go ahead.
What we did was, once we all were sent home for work back in March, we decided we weren't going to close anybody because so many of our people were put on layoffs. And the same thing, some people had been offered jobs and all of a sudden, nope, you can't start. So several months later, they're still in the same position. Normally on a normal file, we might've closed no activity or no something, but we just, as a group, decided we're going to keep everybody open, and still have kept everybody open. A lot are still on layoff, but a lot of our people are the essential workers out there on the front line. And a lot of them are afraid too, because they have to wear masks and the public's coming in. But some of them are still working, but we're not closing anybody quickly at all anymore.
Okay.
I'm curious if anyone's having to provide supplies or anything like that to consumers so that they can work.
Actually, we are. Really? Actually, right now we're even writing it into our IPEs that we will provide it, and we have supplies in all of our offices to give out to our consumers for that also.
Oh, now that's interesting. How does that work, Kim? How do you get do you have additional funding or things?
It's part of our normal funding. We have the money to do that with the regular IPEs, but all our offices, we just bought bulk things for our staff and for the community that is coming in, and then all consumers who need anything, we just ask them. Some of their employers will provide it, but some don't, so we will.
Okay. That's interesting. You're actually having to write that into the IPE.
We don't have to, but if we know they're going to need it, we just do.
Yeah, that's great.
So Rachel writes that we would, but our CIL's got CARES Act dollars and can provide that. So we're trying to get it to them first. That's a great use of comparable benefits.
Yep.
All right, Jamie, should we move on in the slide?
I think we should. Actually, we're at the end of the presentation. We want to share this information with you all to save the date. Oklahoma Tribal Vocational Rehabilitation is having a virtual conference next week, September the 2nd and the 3rd. So we just wanted to remind everyone about this conference. Oklahoma Tribal VR has a conference annually, and we were invited prior to COVID to participate in this conference. And then COVID happened and the conference became virtual. So if you want any additional information about it, just email Winona. She's leading this project, and she's putting together the information for AVERTAC to participate. So, or you can email any of us. We'll be glad to send you any links or any information if you're interested in participating in the Oklahoma Tribal VR virtual conference. And then also September 10th, we have the final step of the VR process webinar series, and it's post-employment services. And Suzanne is leading this webinar, and she actually produced most of the material for this step of the VR process. And so she and Wayne will be presenting this last step of the VR process on September the 10th. So please join us. We need your input, and we would like to have some conversation on post-employment. And then, of course, we would like your feedback on today's webinar. So if you have a chance, fill out this survey. And I think, I'm not sure if John can put the link into the chat box. I'll try to copy it and put it in the chat box also. But it's really important for you guys to give us some feedback, because we need to know if any of this information is helpful, if it's something that we could review your comments and maybe address anything that should be changed or edited. So we appreciate your feedback. And I want to thank our presenters today, Wayne, for producing all of that material for today's presentation. Thank you so much. Suzanne, always with your perspective as a previous director. And I'd like especially thank Celeste Hunt for taking the time. I know they're really busy. You said your office is really rocking and rolling right now, huh, Celeste?
It's crazy, but we're making it happen.
That's great to hear. Thank you so much for being with us today and providing some input. And Paula, thank you always for being willing to participate in our webinars and give feedback as a director, and we thank you for that. And all the participants that were willing to discuss and talk today, we thank you for that also.
Thank you, Jamie, for your time, and thank you, AVERTAC, for taking the time out to assist us today.
Thanks so much. Everyone have a good afternoon, and we thank you again. Look forward to talking with you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Kim.